the opportunity to be here. I am Rowland Buck. I am the chair of the board of the Wesleyan Covenant Association for the Holston area. And I have been a United Methodist pastor for 30-something years. And my father was a United Methodist pastor before me. And I have great-grandfathers who were Methodist Episcopal pastors. I have been a Methodist even before I was born. I was a Methodist. And maybe I'm talking about predestination now. I don't know. But I have loved the United Methodist Church my whole life. I was baptized as an infant in the Methodist Church. And then I was confirmed in the United Methodist Church. I received a call to ministry in a United Methodist Church, and all of that spans from Chattanooga to Southwest Virginia, where all of those things happened, and took my first appointment in Lee County, southwest corner of Virginia, while I was going to seminary at Asbury, and I have loved being a United Methodist. Until a few years ago, and well, more than a few now. So I come tonight with a certain level of grief that I'm carrying, and maybe you have that too. We're saddened, we're burdened, we're torn up about what we've seen happen to the United Methodist denomination. I have told others that the United Methodist Church that I knew and loved seemed to have died around 2012 when there was this horrible general conference and the elements of the sacrament were trashed and thrown on the ground in the midst of protest of what was happening at general conference. And I just was looking at the news reports of that, just wondering what's happened to my church. So I share that with you, not try to persuade you anyway, but you're in the discernment period. My church has just gone through a discernment period, and so I understand the gravity and the weight and the grief of this moment. And there are no winners and losers in this. We've all lost something. That being said, what I want to share with you tonight is something that's a ray of hope for me and something I look forward to being a part of. The Global Methodist Church was launched on May the 1st of this year. It has been in the plans for a couple of years before that, when it appeared that there was no answer to the stalemate and the fighting that was happening at the general conference level of the church. And it has been talked about. We were hoping that the protocol for reconciliation through grace and separation would be passed at the 22 general conference, which was postponed from 2020. And when in March, when it was announced that the 2022 General Conference would be postponed for a third time to 2024, the Transitional Leadership Council of the Global Methodist Church decided that it was time to launch, that we couldn't wait any longer. So May 1st, the Global Methodist Church began operations. I think the first churches actually joined in June, I think. And those were all Bulgarian churches that the Judicial Council ruled that annual conferences in the United States could not withdraw as a whole, but that did not apply to annual conferences overseas. So the Bulgarian and Romanian, that's right, Bulgarian and Romanian annual conference voted to withdraw from the United Methodist Church, and that annual conference as a whole joined the Global Methodist Church. So right off from the bat, the Global Methodist Church is truly global. North American churches were not the first to be a part of the Global Methodist Church. So churches are joining. the last estimate I heard was less than 500 churches have joined at this point, but more are joining every day. In fact, the staff of the Global Methodist Church that's why they're relying on the Wesleyan Covenant Association persons to talk about the Global Methodist Church, because they're kind of overwhelmed with the number of churches that are coming in and trying to get that paperwork done and everything. So I'm glad to share with you about the Global Methodist Church. And to start, I simply want to share with you a video. So out of all the grief that we have been going through over the last 10 years or so as we've watched this situation in the United Methodist denomination increasingly get more hostile and more crazy, we in the Wesleyan Covenant Association began to dream of something different. We began to dream of a church that is alive and holds Jesus as Lord of all things and dependent on the power of the Holy Spirit to fuel energy and passion for ministry in the world. We began to long for a church that believes in scriptural authority, is clear about its doctrine and its mission, and intends to hold people accountable at all levels of the church for missional purposes. We began to dream of a church that was a little more streamlined and less complex, and a little less costly overhead to organize and institute the mission of the church. We began to dream about a church that understands that local churches make disciples, not annual conferences, and the goal would be to push as many decisions to the local church level instead of a top-down approach. We began to dream about a church that works hard to meet people at their point of need and to offer them Christ. And we began to dream about a church that's clear about what it's for and no longer has to be distracted for decades over what it's against. And we want to know a church that knows we are burdened for the souls of those who don't know Christ, and knows that we must reach all generations and ages. And so the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which is an advocacy group within the United Methodist Church, it was formed in 2016 to be a voice for traditional and Orthodox United Methodists, to make sure their voice was heard on the broader level of the general church. We were involved in the negotiations with the protocol, and we were hoping that we could somehow help the church recover its traditional and Orthodox roots. But somewhere around 2019, 2020, we realized that was probably not going to happen. And so the plans were made to take these dreams of what could be in the church and try to make them a reality. And so the WCA, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, has kind of been acting as the midwife at our global gatherings, which have been held, COVID kind of interrupted our global gatherings, but we held one in Chicago in 2016, another one in Montgomery, Alabama in 2019 or 2020, and then the most recent one in Indianapolis just this past March. Those gatherings were going over the basic framework of putting together a church organization and systems and a book of doctrine and disciplines, and a transitional leadership council was formed to kind of begin to put all those resources together and begin to think through what would a new church that we are dreaming of begin to look like, and how would it be governed, and how would it all be put together. So out of all of that, the mission statement for the Global Methodist Church was formed, which was to make disciples of Jesus Christ that worship passionately, love extravagantly, and witness boldly. And this doctrine and discipline that helps will govern the church, and it's a transitional book of doctrine and discipline, because until there's a convening conference and every church that will then currently be in the Global Methodist Church meets with its representatives to begin to adopt that and put their own stamp and mark and have their own voice into it. The Transitional Leadership Council has put this transitional book to get us to that point. So at some time in 2024, we think, maybe 2025, there will be a convening conference. You may remember from your Methodist history that there was a convening conference in 1784, the Christmas conference, that gave birth to the Methodist Episcopal Church in America. And so that's the way we Methodists do things. We hold conferences and we talk out things and put things together, and then put our heart into that covenant, and then live it out. So the linchpins that this denomination is hanging on is, number one, an orthodox theology, firmly in line with 2,000 years of Christian doctrine and tradition. We want to be an orthodox, traditional church in the Wesleyan tradition. You know the doctrinal standards of the United Methodist Church. You've probably seen them in the Book of Discipline. The Global Methodist Church shares all of those doctrines. The Articles of Religion of the Methodist Church, the Articles of Confession of the Evangelical United Brethren Church, which themselves hang on the ancient creeds of the church, the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, as well as Wesley's Standard Sermons and Wesley's New Testament explanatory notes on the New Testament. All of those are the doctrinal standards of the United Methodist Church. The problem, yes. Exactly. Yeah. If you're not aware of the explanatory notes, Wesley, for new believers, wrote basically a commentary. He has comments on just nearly every verse of the New Testament, in which he kind of explains and gives some background and helps the reader understand what the Bible's talking about. And those have become a part of Methodist doctrinal standards. If Wesley said it, we typically agree with it, and it becomes part of our doctrinal standards. He also has the explanatory notes on the Old Testament. They were done later than the New Testament, and for some odd reason, which I don't really understand, have never been considered part of our doctrinal standards. I think they should be, but they never have been. But you can, if you don't have a copy handy of the explanatory notes, you can get them on a website. I believe it's BibleStudyTools.org. Well, has Wesley's explanatory notes that you can look up and see them there. So where was I going with all that? Those are all doctrinal standards that we share in common with most, if not all, Wesleyan denominations and the United Methodist Church. The difference, I would say, is that we intend to live by them. We intend to hold people accountable to them. We intend to expect our pastors to teach them and not change them. And in the words of Rob Renfro, we believe what the United Methodist Church says it believes. And we want to have accountability in making sure that those doctrines are held true to. Another one is that the bureaucracy of the general church has to be streamlined and simpler to grab a hold of, and it's got to be reduced because it has become the tail that wags the dog rather than the way it was intended. I've heard all my life that the annual conference exists to serve the local church, but it seems over the past 20 years that it's been the exact opposite, that the local church has been there to serve and feed the annual conference. The Global Methodist Church wants to flip that and return as much control and missional energy to the local church. So in the Global Methodist Church has the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines is 88% smaller than the United Methodist Book of Discipline. So it's a less complex and a more streamlined approach to doing church. Another aspect of that was, I think, the reaction toward the Council of Bishops and how they have become an entity unto themselves has caused us to think maybe, at least starting out, we need to have bishops that are not there for life, but they have term limits. They're elected for a time. Now, that time is not specified in the Transitional Book of Discipline. I believe, number one, is we don't have any bishops yet. There's one presiding elder over Bulgaria and Romania. There are 2 new annual conferences in the Global Methodist Church in the last couple of months because of special called sessions of annual conference in the United Methodist Church approving church disaffiliations. So there were 80 some odd churches in South Georgia that disaffiliated, and so now there is a South Georgia annual conference of the Global Methodist Church, and there were, I can't remember how many, I'm thinking there were over 100 in Texas. I can't remember. But the East Texas annual conference of the Global Methodist Church was formed just a few weeks ago. And so I have not heard that bishops have been appointed over that. So I would imagine they'll exist on presiding elders, which is the term the Global Methodist Church is going to use for district superintendents until there's a convening conference and bishops can be elected. I have not heard any other specifics on how that's going to work because we're still in process, bringing churches in as they get their disaffiliations approved. But the plan is to have bishops that have term limits. They'll serve for a while as a bishop. Then I understand they can return to the pastorate, or if they're of age, they want to retire, they can become, I think, senior or emeritus status, but they won't serve on the Council of Bishops or anything like that. They'll just simply acknowledge the fact that they were bishops and available for maybe further consultation. Within the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, which will carry over into the Book of Doctrine and Discipline, I'm sure, is an enhancement of accountability. at all levels of the church. One of the problems that we have experienced in the United Methodist Church is a breakdown in accountability between the General Conference, which is the only body that can speak for the church, and bishops and annual conferences who are supposed to live out the will of the General Conference. And you may have heard this, but one of the reasons that breakdown in accountability has occurred happened in 1939 when the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church North reunited. And as part of that merger, an entity was put into the polity of our church called the Jurisdictional Conference. You know, we're in the southeastern jurisdiction. Until that time, bishops were elected and held accountable by the General Conference. But in 1939, frankly, because Southern churches didn't want Northern bishops coming down south telling them how to do church, and all the black churches were put in a central conference, which was then done away with several years later. Jurisdictions were formed, and jurisdictions then would elect their own bishops and place their bishops in their conferences and hold them accountable at that level. So fast forward several years later, and the Western jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church chooses to elect an openly gay, married lesbian bishop. And we're saying, well, how'd that happen? The General Conference has said she shouldn't even be an ordained minister, much less a bishop. We need to do something about this. And so, of course, it was referred to the Judicial Council, and the Judicial Council agreed, yes, she is invalidly elected as a bishop, but we have no power to remove her. Her jurisdiction. Testing, there I am. So where was I? So the Judicial Council says we can't remove her. Her jurisdiction has to remove her. Well, they elected her. Why would they remove her? And so to this day, even though the Judicial Council has said she's invalidly elected, Bishop Olivito is still bishop of the Mountain Sky Conference and still sits on the Council of Bishops, even though she's elected in defiance of our own book of discipline. So looking at this, the Transitional Book of Discipline of the Global Methodist Church wants to restore that bridge of accountability between the General Conference and the bishops and the presiding elders and the presiding elders over pastors, even down to local churches. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So one of the bishop's roles in the Global Methodist Church will be to teach the doctrine of the church and also hold the pastors serving under them accountable for teaching the doctrine of the church and not teaching doctrine that is contrary to the discipline of the church. It kind of flabbergasts me, as you know, this is my own personal opinion. I hope I don't get in trouble. that in the discernment period, one of the options for you to pursue during your discernment period is to have persons on both sides of the issues come in and talk to your church about what the progressives believe and what the traditionals believe. And I've always kind of been flabbergasted that we would come to the point where we would allow a person who teaches a doctrine contrary to our church be allowed to come in and speak to our churches. I understand everybody's trying to figure out where they're going to go and what they believe, but it seems like there's a breakdown in accountability somewhere where we're no longer concerned about what we say we believe and what we actually believe. And in the Global Methodist Church, we hope to resolve that and increase that level of accountability so that we stay true to the doctrine that we say we believe. Okay.
You're saying that your plan is to reinstate the accountability, but I'm not exactly sure what it is that you're doing.
Well, sure. One of the things that will happen is if in the Global Methodist Church, if a bishop begins to teach or allow pastors to teach doctrine that's contrary to ours, then there will be mechanisms in the discipline in which to either remove them from office or to reprimand them and bring them back into line. And if they don't bring back in line, then it would be to remove them from office.
Obviously, the Methodist Church had that plan in place too, but it didn't work. So
Because of the jurisdictional conference.
you haven't told me a foolproof plan that you have that's going to work any better than our plan that didn't work. That's what I want to do. What is your plan that's going to guarantee that it's going to work better than what our plan that we had that didn't work?
I think it's hard to guarantee anything in this world, so let me say that. But when the United Methodist Church was formed in 1968, what was begun was an experiment in pluralism. In that before that time, in the Methodist Church, there was this is the doctrine we teach, and if you're a United Methodist pastor, you're expected to answer those 19 questions for ordination. And I can remember my dad was a DS in the late 70s, so I can remember him telling pastors, at least, I wasn't present in the room when it happened, but I remember my dad telling me I had to take this pastor out of his appointment because he wasn't being true to our United Methodist standards. So as early as the 70s, we were still doing that.
Well, and we've done that here in this area recently. I mean, the Holston Conference has still followed our discipline. In this area, we're still following this.
For the most part. There are some questions. We've got creative ways to get around the discipline without actually breaking it. For example, in Oak Ridge, at a church in Oak Ridge, there is a person on staff. He's not ordained. He's married to another man. He's on staff at a church in Oak Ridge, and he's not a pastor and he's not ordained, but he's performing pastoral duties on staff of that church. So that's certainly not in the spirit of the discipline, but it's not technically breaking the discipline either. So we find creative ways to do that simply because we're not in a place in the United Methodist Church anymore where if you're a progressive and I'm a traditionalist, one of us can say to the other, that's not in line with who we are. You either need to find another place or another church to exist in, or you need to change your attitude or behavior.
I'm not seeing that you're addressing that either. I mean, I'm just saying, what I'm looking
I understand.
In this area, we're following, to me, what our discipline says. In the West Coast, it's not being followed.
But we're a connectional church.
I agree.
They're us.
I agree. I totally agree. You're gonna, Global Methodist Church, Western Covenant will be a global church as well. Global Methodist Church. West Coast is West Coast. How are you gonna control West Coast? I mean, that's what I'm saying. West Coast, man, tell me what you're gonna do about West Coast that we couldn't do.
Well, because I as a ordained elder in the southeastern jurisdiction, I can't bring charges against a pastor in the western jurisdiction. I can't do it here. In the Global Methodist Church, I can bring charges against another pastor because they're all under the general conference. And there will be bishops who will keep the doctrine and discipline of the church, or the general conference will remove them from their office.
So that's what you're saying is that you're going to, because that's not what, I mean, that's what I'm asking. You're saying reinstate accountability, and that's what I'm asking. How are you doing that?
We will remove people from their position if they don't follow our doctrine and discipline.
Because the bishops are going to be in control globally? I'm trying to follow.
So the general conference will be the body that speaks for the Global Methodist Church, just like the United Methodist Church. The Global Methodist Church will elect those bishops, and the general conference will elect those bishops. And then the general conference will hold those bishops accountable to fulfill their role and duty within the church. And right. There will no be jurisdictional area, one global church. Because there is a decrease in the bureaucracy size of the Global Methodist Church, apportionments, local church connectional giving will be less. The Transitional Book of Discipline caps it at 6.5% compared to 10% of what we pay as United Methodist churches. 5% of that goes to the annual conference, and up to 1.5% of that will go to the general church. And the Transitional Leadership Council, right about a month, I think, after the launch in May, said that initially they will ask for 1% for the annual conference and 1% for the general church. So starting out at this point, it'll be a 2% apportionment rather than a 10% apportion connectional giving. And that's possible because there's not all these general boards and agencies and general church staff, and it's a much smaller, streamlined organization. One of the other aspects of accountability would be the fact that there's no trust clause. Now, this trust clause has been, if you're considering disaffiliation, the trust clause is the bane of your existence right now. John Wesley instituted the trust clause because he was raising money to build buildings to house societies across England. But he wanted to make sure that they held to the doctrine and the spirit of the Wesleyan movement. So if your society was inhabiting one of those the Wesleyan movement houses of worship, and you began to teach things that were beyond, and you began to disregard the general rules, for example, or one of the other doctrines of the Wesleyan Church, then Wesley had the ability to remove that society from the building. And then he could put another society in there. That was an accountability measure. But now the trust clause has been flipped on us in that it's been used to hold traditional churches into an organization that no longer follows completely the doctrine and discipline of the church. So the Global Methodist Church will not have a trust clause in its property. And you might say, well, how does that help with accountability? Well, by simply saying, the building's yours. We are a coalition of the willing, not the constrained. If you want to be a part of the Global Methodist Church, you will follow our doctrine and discipline. If you don't want to follow our doctrine and discipline, you don't have to be a member of the Global Methodist Church. Take your property and go in peace. But if you want to be a member, a church of the Global Methodist Church, then you will follow our doctrine and discipline. Part of it's an honor system, but then your presiding elder then will follow up and see, are you following our doctrine and our discipline? And if not, then there are procedures in the Transitional Book of Discipline. And I should say, you can read that. I have a copy in my backpack, which I left in the other room. Kurt, you want to go into the other room where I left my backpack? And it's in the main compartment. It's not bound or anything. It's just a big stack of papers together. You'll have to look for it. You can also go online, globalmethodist.org. You can print off a PDF copy of the Doctrine and Discipline, or you can look at it section by section there on the computer screen, and you can see all those different aspects. But there will be no trust clause. We don't want you to be a part of the Global Methodist Church because you have to be, because we own your property. We want you to be a part of the Global Methodist Church because it embodies the way of following Jesus that is true to the Bible and to the Wesleyan movement. Much like the United Methodist Church, there will be two orders of clergy in the Global Methodist Church. There will be deacons and elders. We used to have a two-step process when I was ordained. What did I do with it? Oh, there it is. So here's the United Methodist Book of Discipline, and you can see how tiny the print is and how thick that is. And this is the Transitional Book of Doctrine and Discipline, and you can see it's quite a bit smaller and less. And I don't know if you want to pass that around for people to look at. So two orders of clergy, elders and deacons, and it used to be a two-step. I was ordained a deacon, was a probationary member for 2 years, then I was ordained an elder. Now, the United Methodist Church several years ago split that into two types of clergy. Deacons kind of served the church in various roles, but didn't necessarily pastor a church or preach or serve the sacraments, and that deacon level is available in the Global Methodist Church. And then elders will serve the sacraments and order the life of the church. And local pastors will be offered ordination into one of those, depending on their level of education they've completed in the course of study or whatever education they're pursuing. There will be a strong commitment to female clergy in the Global Methodist Church, as well as clergy of color. And because we're a global church, we understand that will be a beautiful picture of diversity around the world. And the commitment to women has been from the very beginning and will continue to be a part. I'll talk a little bit in just a few moments about the appointment process for pastors. It will look a little different in the Global Methodist Church than it does in the United Methodist Church, but I'll get to that in a minute. Well, I'm about to get into it now. So there's no guaranteed appointment in the Global Methodist Church. In the United Methodist Church in 2016, I believe the removal of the guaranteed appointment was voted on and approved, and then was declared unconstitutional by the Judicial Council. And so it was reinstated. That was simply a recognition of the fact that the guaranteed appointment is economically unsustainable. And I would venture to say that in the coming general conferences, the guaranteed appointment will have to be removed by some means, because it's just impossible to guarantee everybody a church when churches are declining and shrinking and decreasing in number. So at some point, something's going to have to be done about the guaranteed appointment. The Global Methodist Church will not guarantee an appointment. It will, the appointment process will be, so let's say your church, your pastor decides it's time for them to retire or to move on to another church, and so your pastor parish relations committee, because that will be, you don't have to have a pastor parish relations committee in the Global Methodist Church. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but you'll have to have somebody within your church to talk about pastoral succession, and you'll notify your bishop or your presiding elder that our pastor's wanting to move on. We need to begin the process of finding a replacement. And you'll have a couple of choices. You can have a list of candidates given to you, and or you can begin to advertise and receive candidates yourselves. You'll interview those candidates. You'll be required to interview at least one person of color and one female clergy in your list of candidates. When you find the person that's a right fit for you, in consultation with your presiding elder, you'll go to the bishop and say, this seems to be the fit we need. And after some discussions, you'll be either encouraged to choose somebody else, or that the bishop will sign off on that appointment, and you'll decide starting date and all that kind of thing. So all those other clergy that you interviewed that didn't pass your interview process, well, it's up for them to be interviewed by another church, but there's no guarantee that they'll have a church, simply because there may not be a church available at that point. So that's, for some pastors, that's kind of a concerning, because it's been very comfortable for us in the United Methodist Church to know, well, I've always got an appointment. As long as I keep my nose clean, I'm all right. Even though we haven't been growing churches, or even if we haven't been doing satisfactory pastoral work, we're still going to get an appointment. I think this will be an adjustment for a lot of us, especially clergy, to understand that we have to find ways in which to be successful and be effective. Maybe successful is not the right word. Effective in our ministries, so that we can grow the kingdom of God. But that may be an issue for some. Yes.
Just to clarify, in the Global Methodist Church, the church will pick their pastor and not be assigned.
Well, it's not quite that simple. It is a more consultative process than it is now. You won't be forced to take someone you don't want, but you will have a voice in interviewing all the candidates, and then in conversation with the presiding elder and the bishop, choose the candidate that everyone feels is best for you. Your church and your SPR, the pastor parish relations committee of your church will, in consultation with the presiding elder and the bishop, choose together the candidate that you think everyone feels is best.
Well, the way it is now, they just send out a list of appointments.
Right. There's supposed to be a consultative process in the United Methodist Church. Sometimes it's more consultative than at others. In the case of Mount Bethel, it was hardly consultative at all until the appointment was made in North Georgia. And that's happened in some areas because the bishop has the right to make that appointment. And if you don't like it, too bad. I'm not going to say that that's never going to happen in the Global Methodist Church, but the intent is to have more depth conversations and allow the local church to interview candidates before they're appointed to their church. Still appointed and sent, yes. We Methodists have always been sent. From the days of Wesley, they were sent. Part of the problem that we have faced in the United Methodist Church is simply we've watched trust erode between the annual conference, the district, and the local church, and in the general conference. And so we understand in the Global Methodist Church, building trust is going to take some time because we've all kind of got scars from those battles, and we're all going to be a little guarded. And, we're going to have to work through all of that till we find a place to know that people are going to keep their word and that we're all going to be on the same page. And we understand we're bound together by common doctrine and discipline together. And what's good for you is not good for them. And they get more privileges than you are. We'll have to work through the pain of the past. But the idea would be a more consultative process, working together to ensure that there's a good pastoral fit. Yes.
Is there a guarantee that a church actually will receive a pastor, especially in the early days when you may not have supplies of pastors, if you get a large influx of churches? Or is the reverse?
That is a great question that I have not been asked before and haven't thought about. I do know, like churches coming in, the Transitional Leadership Council, and I keep saying that is a group of 17 people. You can go to their website and see their names. Some of them, Jeff Greenway is one of them. Kurt knows Jeff and others on there. Churches and pastors that come in together will stay together, at least for this initial phase. There will be churches that come in without a pastor. In fact, I just talked to a church in Dandridge just a couple of days ago. Said their church wants to go into the Global Methodist, but they know their pastor won't. And so they have their eyes set on another pastor who wants to come into the Global Methodist Church, and they're saying, well, can we get with them and connect that going in? And I said, I think there's a good chance that will happen. If he's willing and you're willing, I think that would happen. So there will be churches coming in without pastors. There will be pastors coming in without churches. And trying to make those matches will be a big part of what the Transitional Leadership Council will be doing over the next couple of years. So I think there will be ways to. I think I heard the bishop say this morning at our district day with the bishop that she understood that there would be some churches that disaffiliate and their pastor may not, but he may not want to leave the United Methodist Church, but he would be happy to stay as their pastor, and that they would bless that. And so I think that's what I heard. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I heard the bishop say this morning. So that's not a stance I've heard any bishop make before then. I've heard them squash that, other bishops in other annual conferences. So that was refreshing for me to hear. Anyway, so does that answer your question? Yeah, kind of, sort of. Yeah. A lot of that's going to be a work in process, but I do know there will be churches that come in without pastors. There will be pastors that come in without churches, and the Transitional Leadership Council will try to bridge those gaps. Yes.
As it is now, once a year, your pastor parent can vote if you want your pastor to stay or if you want to move. Well, if you've got one and you decide it's time for moving, will it still be voted on once a year like it is now? Or is it just whenever you decide you need to go?
That's a good question. What I've heard is that, that a church, it will probably be an annual review, like it is now, but the SPR would be able to initiate the move if they think that's needed. The pastor would be able to initiate the move, and I haven't read this, but I would imagine the way they've talked about it is that the bishop could come in and say, I need your pastor for this specific task or something like we do in the United Methodist Church occasionally. Can we talk about that? Well, then you got to talk to him about him not wanting to go too. I would think in the spirit of of course, as soon as I say something, something's going to happen to prove me wrong, I know. In the spirit of the consultative process, I would think they would certainly respect that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it would not happen, but they would certainly respect that, and you would at least be heard. If that, I would think because we are a sent ministry, that would be the case.
Do you know, Rowland, if in the ministerial part of it, I haven't looked at it that closely, we have that understanding, because we understand that now in the United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Even if we're loved and all this kind of things, that's one of those special things I always say.
That's part of being a connectional church. We are connected together. We're in ministry with every other United Methodist Church, and in the Global Methodist Church, we're in ministry with every other Global Methodist Church, and sometimes the needs of others will have to outweigh our personal desires and wants. And the process is there to help us work through all of that. It may not make everybody happy all the time, but at least we've been heard and we talk about, and hopefully we can at least not be happy, but we know what's best for the kingdom is being looked for.
But you do think it will be like an annual thing?
I think so, yeah. Yes?
So you said that they would have to interview a person of color and a female. What if there's not enough persons of color and female?
Then I would think they would understand that. And if there's nobody available or no one applies or no one puts their name in for your church, then I would think, well, we tried. But yeah, that may very well be a case, until we can raise up pastors and make sure we have enough pastors for all the churches and all that. Yeah, good question. To say clergy and churches that come in together, the plan is for them to stay together. And then, if you and Kurt decide to go in together, Kurt would remain your pastor until a time that either the churches are formed and Kurt says, well, I need to go somewhere else, or you said we need a new pastoral leadership. But the initial plan is coming in together, that you would stay together. So quickly, the leadership team of the local church, you need to have a leadership team. It's referred to in the Transitional Book of Discipline as a church council. The rest of the language, like finance committee and trustees and SPR, it's worded kind of like, if no other provision is made for this, the church should have a pastor-parish relations committee. If no other provision for this is provided, their church should be a finance committee. So you've got freedom to organize the church the way it seems right to your congregation, to organize the church for your context and mission in your community. But you're not going to have to be dictated to have a committee on higher education and ministry and committee on the status and role of women. You can if you need that, but you don't have to. And you need a leadership team. Beyond that, it's how your church needs to organize in order to function. The Global Methodist Church will continue to use WestPath for clergy pension and benefits. And I think one of the most exciting things about the Global Methodist Church is its commitment to planting churches. They have established a goal of 3,500 new church starts within the first 7 years of our existence. So trying to plant new churches is where those abundance of clergy will be deployed probably a lot in order to try to start new churches in new areas. And frankly, that's absolutely necessary, because if we're moving into the Global Methodist Church just because we're disgruntled with the United Methodist Church with no plan to do something different, what's the point? It's not really going to benefit the kingdom of God. But if we have a chance to start something new, to move the Wesleyan movement into the 21st century and beyond as a church planting movement that it was meant to be in 1784, and we can begin to transform not just our country but the world with church plants. What a remarkable thing that would be, to look back and say, wow, there are 3,500 new churches after 7 years of starting. All right, that's kind of the broad overview of how the church will function. Are there any other questions you want to ask about that? Well, let me close with 10 reasons I think that it's good to consider becoming part of the Global Methodist Church. Number one is the consistency in doctrine. We're all going to believe the same basic articles of religion and creeds and hold to them. They will comprise what we believe about the Christian faith and how we act and govern how we act in the world and with each other. Number two would be that we're reclaiming the Wesleyan heritage of accountable discipleship. The class and band meeting, those accountable discipleship groups that Wesley pioneered in the 1700s, will be a part of what we do in the United Methodist Church, in the Global Methodist Church. That habit's going to be hard to break. I have a band meeting. I don't know if any of you all are. I meet with two other clergy. We meet on Wednesday mornings via Zoom. And we've been meeting for a little over a year now. And I was meeting with another group before our schedules all changed before that. And I can say that the band meetings that I've been a part of have been the single most transformative experience of my life in terms of helping me integrate my faith into my life and to pursue holiness of heart and life. So I'm personally excited about reclaiming. You know, back in the 1800s, you didn't join a Methodist church. You joined a class that happened to be a part of a Methodist church. And your small group was the place where your membership resided. And about the turn of the 20th century, the class meeting and the band meeting began to be non-emphasized in the Methodist Episcopal Church. What's interesting about that is that that's about the same time the denomination started to decline and we lost our evangelistic fervor. At the turn of the 20th century, we had at least one church for every post office in the country. And today, the United Methodist Church has never known, in its 50 years of existence, has never known a year of growth. It's been constant decline for 50 years. I think it's time to bring back the class and the band meetings, to get real with one another and to understand that social holiness is about meeting together to pursue holiness. Number 3, we're serious about church planting. A goal of 35 house churches planted in the next 7 years. 3,500, sorry. Number 4, mission-driven versus being a structurally bound, bloated bureaucracy. We want to let the mission of the church define what we do and how we do it. Number 5, a redefined episcopacy with term limits and an emphasis on contending for the faith once delivered to the saints. 6, a systematic accountability for all, not ruled by bishops who are not held accountable by the General Conference. A leaner organization, lower costs, and a cap on apportionments, along with no trust clause. It's an organization of the willing, not of the constrained. More input from the local church on clergy appointments. An easier path for ordination instead of the United Methodist Church's 10-year process. And we're global from day one. We are truly a church that spans the globe and encourages people of all ages, nations, and races to participate equally in God's kingdom. The bottom line, I think this new denomination called the Global Methodist Church will be poised to be more effective in sharing the saving good news of Jesus, making disciples of Jesus, and making the realities of heaven the realities of earth. Thank you for letting me be here tonight and share something about the Global Methodist Church. I'm excited about to be a part of it. We will welcome you into it and look forward to years of ministry together.
Thank you, Rowland. We do appreciate everybody. If you would stand at this time. And, I thought a lot because about the bands and the classes, that was the heartbeat of Methodism. And when it started to go away, and it really fully went away by the 50s, it was gone. And that's when everything just began to decline. So I don't know that God's calling us back to call it class or call it bands, but he's calling us to renewal. And that's what I have prayed for, and that's what you hear me preach. The renewal of his church needs to take place, even in the midst of the stuff that we've had to deal with. And I pray that for you, brothers and sisters. I pray it for any of the other churches represented, and I certainly pray it for the dear people of First United Methodist, because I appreciate you so much. So we're going to be praying and discerning and believing that God's going to lead us to where we need to be. So again, thank you. I love you, brother, and appreciate you so much. So as you go, may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ be in your heart. May his Spirit fill your spirit. And may the very presence of Jesus guide you every step that you take, every day. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And everybody said, amen. Go in peace. Yes?
If we disaffiliate and we don't want to join the global
Yeah.
church,
Well, the local church leadership would have to make a decision of what we would do. Be independent, could look at another denomination, another Wesleyan denomination. There's some options that we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. All right. Thank you. I don't know anything about global and the Wesleyan denomination merging. Somebody asked, is there a rumor about the global Methodist and the Wesleyan?
The Wesleyan
merging?
Church?
Yeah.
Not that I've heard. I've not heard that.
It was stated that could possibly happen.
Hey, how are you? Good. Chris Thacker. Nice to meet you. I'm church council chair.
Okay,
I'm
great.
the lucky guy. Two questions for you. So one, it gets back to the pastor issue. So what is going to be the future plan for pastors at United Methodist Church meeting? So you've got United Methodist